In this activity, we're going to talk about student workflow in Seesaw and some rituals and routines we're hoping that all teachers will put in place during Distance Learning 2.0. My name is Holly Skatzum, and I'm the Digital Learning Coordinator for Bloomington Public Schools Early Learning through Grade 5, and Beth Flatmeyer, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, was also my partner in creating the practices that you will review in this presentation. So where did we come up with the consistent practices that your team is about to review? First, we looked at research. As many of you may have heard, we have partners in research at the University of Minnesota, and we've been working with them all summer long to really look at best practices in online teaching and learning, both for students and for families. We know from experience, so many teachers last spring in Distance Learning 1.0 learned a lot and identified important areas that we would improve as we moved into Distance Learning 2.0. We made a promise, so our promise to the Bloomington community is to improve Distance Learning 2.0. Using consistent practices, both for our students and our families, will go a long way in making that promise. And lastly, learning networks. We are not the only one trying to solve this problem. Districts across the metro are using Seesaw as their learning management system at the elementary level. And so sharing ideas across districts across the metro has also allowed us to generate some important resources and ideas in this presentation. As we move throughout this presentation, know that you are not alone. There are many support systems in place for you. Your tech integrationists are all trained in Seesaw and are all Seesaw ambassadors. Your sites each have Seesaw ambassadors as well, so you can click into the link to view the teachers at your building that are also very well trained in using Seesaw. And lastly, Seesaw has many supports that they offer through their Seesaw Support Center. So the 4 rituals and routines that your team is going to review throughout this presentation. 1, the idea of generating a digital tool introduction calendar, so that we know what we're going to teach and the timeline in which we'll teach it. 2, lesson planning and design, some important things to keep in mind when we go to create our lessons in Seesaw. 3, what would be our students' daily routine each day, that consistent routine they come back to. And lastly, communication. So how are we communicating to our students and our families and keeping that consistent? So I am just going to do an overview of each section and allow your teams to dive deeper as you use your 1-hour time slot to get to know this presentation. So please know that section 1, as we mentioned, is a digital tool calendar. We have here some suggestions of the many different things you'll have to introduce to your students. And then we have a couple sample introduction calendars. So you can look at kindergarten sample and a first grade sample. A tip to keep in mind is as your team generates your tool introduction calendar, it's important to share that with some of the other teachers, special education, EL, specialist teachers, so that they know when your students are learning these skills and when they'll be ready to apply them. The second section you're going to dig into as a team is lesson planning and design. So some of the consistent practices that we're asking all teachers to use: multi-page, designing your lessons per subject area in multi-page. So we'll be asking all teachers to send out multiple activities during the day, 1 activity per subject area using the multi-page tool. Chunk and chew is a strategy that you've heard across the board in all of your PD sessions, and we'll be asking you to use that strategy in your lessons in Seesaw. We ask, as always, that you list your learning target and the task that student might need to complete, and there's a sample here for that. Balance of digital and non-digital is going to be really important. We want to make sure when kids are coming into Seesaw that they are not just doing activities on the screen, but that there's some activities waiting for them that require them to get off of the screen. Accessibility is huge, so making sure we're designing our lessons with both visual, audio, simple directions, making sure all of our students can access the information. We're going to ask that every classroom embeds an end-of-day routine, which includes some SEL. So considering how students might reflect at the end of the day, how they might communicate to you what they've gotten done or their progress throughout the day, and then making sure we're checking in on students and seeing how they're doing. Color coding is another strategy we're going to ask you to use to help our families out on the other side. Thinking about a different color for each day of the week and then using that color and embedding it in your daily lessons. Picture cues, so allowing our students to kind of get organized as they jump into Seesaw. Seeing a little book in the top right corner could be a great cue that it is a reading lesson, or seeing a math sign could be a great signal that it's a math lesson. As kids switch between classes, be it specialists or homeroom classes, having a little image of the teacher in the top right corner can help them stay organized as well. What we have here on this slide that we'll ask your team to look into is just samples for a lot of those consistent practices I just mentioned. So if you need some ideas or some inspiration to get started, your team can certainly jump into any of these resources, make copies, or just kind of peruse and see what makes sense for your team. We have here a sample lesson that is going to model all of the consistent practices. So again, if you'd like to make a copy of this lesson template and use it as your own, or if you just need some visuals or an idea of how to get started, this will be super helpful. The third consistent practice is a student daily routine. We want to make sure that our students know what they're doing each day that they're in their asynchronous platform. So building a routine that we come back to over and over and over again is going to be super helpful. So we've laid out 3 tasks that we would like students to complete each day in Seesaw. Task 1 is going to happen during your morning meeting or your launch, and that's just making sure students have had a preview of the tasks that are waiting for them in Seesaw throughout the day. Task 2, when they go into Seesaw on their own, their first step is always going to be to check for teacher feedback. And task 3, at the end of the day, completing that end of the day reflection where we've embedded that SEL component, and then visiting the Seesaw blog for fun and connection. So each slide afterwards walks through task 1, 2, and 3 for your team and gives you a little bit more information. So you can walk through that with your team and think about those different pieces throughout the day. The last section of this presentation that we'll have you talk about and look at with your team is communication. Again, keeping communication consistent both for our families and our students. So when we think about students, we are going to ask that every single morning, every teacher does a launch during their synchronous morning meeting. So screen sharing and presenting the schedule for the day, similar to how you would have with chart paper in your classroom. Clearly communicating what students are going to complete throughout the day and model for them what that looks like, or take them right into Seesaw to look at the different tasks they need to complete. For families, we're going to ask that each teacher sends a peek at the week through Seesaw Messenger. And there will be 2 parts to that weekly message to families. Part 1 is going to be a visual overview of the week. And part 2 will be a concise message that gets sent along with the visual in Seesaw Messenger. And a reminder that as we send messages in Seesaw Messenger, those do translate on the other side for families that need that piece. So what we have is a suggested template and format linked in here. So we're going to encourage your team to look at that. And again, make a copy if you would like, or just use it as an example that you can model after. We have a lot of different communication tools. So we're going to talk now about the tools we have for students and the tools we have for families and when we would use those different tools. So as you see here, we have Seesaw Class Messenger. We would ask you to send most of your communication through Messenger. If we train our students to look in that one spot, then they're always going to know to go there to get the information. Then we move into email. For our students in grades 2 through 5, we will have email turned on. So if there's any reason to have that 2-way communication back and forth, we would recommend using email with your students. And lastly, if students are really struggling and they need that additional support, we would always recommend that you just jump on a one-on-one Google Meet. Looking at the family side of things, we have a couple more tools available to us. So first we have Seesaw District-Wide Messenger. This is at the admin level, and it allows the admins of the Seesaw dashboard to send messages school-wide. This is going to be a really important feature that we're going to train in our administrators on, because again, if we train our families to always go to Seesaw, that's a consistent location where they can get communication. The benefit of Seesaw is a translation feature if we send our messages through Seesaw District-Wide Messenger. At the classroom level, we're going to ask that you always communicate whole class information, like your peek at the week, through Seesaw Classroom Messenger. It is a 2-way communication tool, so when you send that message out, families can message you back. And again, the benefit of using Seesaw is that translation feature. Our next tool, which is new this year, is Remind. Remind lets you call families and text families without your phone number showing. So this will be really beneficial for anything that needs a quick phone call or quick two-way texting. Reminder that both Remind and Seesaw are two-way communication tools for our families. So you can use either tool, and we would recommend you use the tool that your family prefers. So getting that information from families. Do they prefer Remind or do they prefer Seesaw? And both are great tools for that two-way communication. Lastly, we're going to recommend email for anything that is sensitive information. So IEPs, legal issues. The scenario here is perhaps a family where the two parents are divorced and they would like the communication sent to both of them with opportunities for them to both respond back. So a threaded email conversation would be better for that type of scenario. We thank you for engaging in this presentation and thinking about these consistent practices. We would invite you now with your team to go back through this presentation and take time to look at each area, to look at the examples, to talk with your team about implementation. And if you have any questions about anything presented here, please reach out to myself, Holly Skadsum, or Beth Flatmeyer. Thank you.